A 7-year-old boy was shot in the head inside a church. Not in a war zone, not in a place you would expect violence, but inside the largest church in America on a quiet Sunday afternoon, in the middle of a worship service. And the man whose name is on that church, the man who built it, who filled it with 45,000 people every single week, he didn't even address the real questions. He just smiled and told everyone to have faith. That's who Joel Osteen is. But before we talk about what's happening right now, you need to understand how we got here. Because this story doesn't start with scandal. It starts with a boy who never wanted to be seen at all. Joel Osteen was born in Houston, Texas in 1963, the fifth of 6 children. His father, John Osteen, was a Southern Baptist preacher who walked away from his denomination after something shattered his world. Joel's sister Lisa was born with severe disabilities. John didn't leave quietly. He left searching. He turned to faith healing, embraced a new kind of Christianity, and in 1959 started a church in a rundown feed store with 234 seats and a belief that God could do the impossible. He called it Lakewood. Joel grew up watching all of it. The crowds growing, the altar calls, the tears. But unlike his siblings who stepped forward to preach and serve, Joel stepped back. He didn't want the spotlight. He preferred the shadows. And when he left for college at Oral Roberts University to study radio and television, most people figured he'd carve out a quiet life behind the scenes of someone else's dream. He dropped out after less than a year, not because he failed, but because he already knew what he wanted to build. In 1982, at just 19 years old, Joel came back to Houston and started Lakewood's television ministry. 1 local channel, 1 national cable network, and 17 years of staying completely invisible. For nearly 2 decades, Joel never preached a single sermon. He produced. He directed. He edited. He tracked which suit his father wore every Sunday, so the broadcasts looked seamless. He studied hundreds of sermons, not through a seminary, but through a camera lens. And when his father would ask him to step up and preach, Joel had one answer. No, you're the preacher. I'll make you look good on TV. Then January 1999 arrived, and everything changed in the most devastating way imaginable. On January 17th, Joel finally said yes. He preached his first sermon. His hands were shaking. He had no training, no theology degree, no experience behind a pulpit, but he did it. And his father, John Osteen, sat in the front row and watched his son preach for the very first time. 6 days later, John Osteen was dead. Heart attack. No warning. No goodbye. Joel's first sermon turned out to be the last one his father ever heard. And just like that, a man who had spent his entire adult life hiding behind a camera was suddenly standing in front of 6,000 people who needed him to lead them. He didn't feel ready. He said so publicly. Many people inside the church doubted he could do it. But something clicked. Within 5 years, Lakewood went from 8,000 weekly attendees to somewhere between 25 and 30,000. Joel doubled the television budget. He bought the best time slots in the biggest cities. He put up billboards on highways. But more than any of that, his sermons felt different from anything that had come before. There was no fire and brimstone, no sin, no judgment, no hard edges. Just hope, just warmth, just the quiet radical idea that God wanted you to have a good life. People came, and then they kept coming. By 2003, the 8,000-seat building couldn't hold the crowds anymore. So Joel did something that made the entire city of Houston stop and stare. He struck a deal to lease the Compaq Center, the old home of the Houston Rockets, a 16,000-seat sports arena. The lease alone cost $12 million. The renovation, $95 million. They gutted the entire building, added 5 floors, installed waterfalls, miles of carpet, 200,000 square feet of rooms and studios and classrooms. A basketball stadium reborn as a house of worship. On July 16, 2005, Lakewood Church opened its doors. Every seat was filled. 16,000 people inside. Millions more watching on television. And Joel Osteen stood at the center of all of it, smiling that smile. By 2010, they bought the building outright for $7.5 million. Weekly attendance crossed 40,000. Television broadcasts reached 10 million viewers in over 100 countries. This wasn't a church anymore. It was something bigger, something harder to define. And Joel's message was the fuel that made it all run. He told people they weren't broken. He told them better days were coming. He told them that God's dream for their life was bigger than anything they could imagine. He talked about speaking blessings into existence, that the words you say shape the life you live, that if you believe with enough faith, wealth, health, and happiness will follow. Critics called it the prosperity gospel. They called it shallow. They called it cotton candy Christianity, sweet and easy, but with nothing real inside. His followers didn't care. In October 2004, Joel released his first book, Your Best Life Now. He was a first-time author with no literary background and no celebrity endorsement. Within 3 months, it had sold 500,000 copies. By May 2005, it crossed 1 million. It stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 200 straight weeks, almost 4 years. In total, it sold over 4 million copies worldwide. He followed it with more than 15 books, at least 7 of which became bestsellers. His 2005 book, Become a Better You, earned him $13 million in royalties alone. He started touring arenas. Night of Hope, he called them. Tickets were sold at $15 each, and people came in massive numbers. 20,000 people in Miami's American Airlines Arena. Sellout events in New York and Los Angeles. By 2019, he filled Wembley Arena in London. These were prayer gatherings. They were productions, lights, music, energy. And everywhere Joel went, the same irresistible message. You are blessed. Your best days are ahead. Don't give up. He sat with Oprah. He appeared on Larry King. He went on Good Morning America. He reached people who had never set foot in a church and never watched a sermon in their life. 25 million Facebook followers. 10 million on Twitter. 5 million on Instagram. The Osteen brand was generating an estimated $55 million a year. Lakewood's operating budget reached $90 million annually. And this is where the story gets complicated. Of that $90 million budget, only 1.3%, just $1.2 million, went to missions and outreach. $25 million went to the television ministry. $31 million to weekly services. Millions more to administration, fundraising, and events. Critics said the numbers told a story Joel's sermons never would. That Lakewood had become less a place of worship and more a media empire running on the goodwill of people who believed in something bigger than themselves. And then came the question everyone was already whispering. Joel himself says he hasn't taken a salary from the church since 2004. His personal wealth, estimated anywhere between $50 and $100 million, comes entirely from his books and speaking fees. He lives in a $10.5 million mansion in Houston. He purchased a second home worth $3 million. Some people admire that success. Others say it's proof that the prosperity gospel works, but only for the man preaching it. Then the pandemic hit, and the mask began to slip. In 2020, during the height of COVID-19, Lakewood Church accepted $4.4 million in federal Paycheck Protection Program loans. Money designed to keep small businesses alive. Money that tens of thousands of struggling American families desperately needed. Lakewood had a $90 million annual budget. Joel Osteen was personally worth tens of millions. The public reaction was immediate and brutal. The church said none of the money went to Joel or Victoria personally. They eventually returned the full amount, but the damage was done. A national conversation had started about megachurches, money, and the line between faith and finance. But nothing prepared anyone for August 2017. Hurricane Harvey. Houston was drowning. Streets became rivers. Families climbed onto rooftops. Thousands needed shelter. And sitting there in the middle of the city, completely dry, completely intact, stood Lakewood Church, a 16,000-seat arena that could have held every displaced family in the surrounding neighborhood. The church posted online that the building was inaccessible due to flooding. But photos told a different story. The roads around Lakewood were dry. Videos emerged. People drove right up to the doors. The internet exploded. The hashtag #OpenLakewoodChurch spread globally within hours. Celebrities called him out by name. A furniture store owner named Mattress Mac opened his showroom floors immediately to thousands of strangers. He didn't have a $90 million budget. He didn't have 45,000 weekly followers. He just opened the door. Joel stayed silent. Days passed before Lakewood finally opened. By then, the story had already been written, and no amount of bottled water or social media prayers could fully unwrite it. When Hurricane Beryl hit in 2025, Lakewood distributed 40,000 water bottles and food. The effort was genuine, but the internet remembered. The jokes came immediately. Is Joel locking the doors again? Even people from inside the church admitted they were surprised it opened so quickly this time. The shadow of Harvey had never really left. And then something happened that no joke could touch. February 11th, 2024. A woman named Janess Yvonne Moreno walked into Lakewood Church at 1:53 in the afternoon. She had an AR-15. She had her 7-year-old son beside her. She told security she had a bomb in her backpack. And then she opened fire in a hallway, sending 30 rounds into the air of a building filled with worshipers. A 47-year-old man was shot. A 57-year-old volunteer was hit in the hip. Off-duty police officers working security engaged her. Moreno was killed, but in the chaos, before anyone could stop it, her son Samuel was shot in the head. What followed was one of the most heartbreaking stories you will ever hear connected to a church. Samuel underwent 2 emergency surgeries. Doctors removed half of his skull. He lost a large portion of his frontal lobe. For weeks, he was too fragile for any kind of brain activity testing. His grandmother gave painful, devastating updates online. He came off a ventilator after 13 days. He survived, but the child who walked into that church that afternoon would never be the same. Investigators later found that Moreno had a documented history of schizophrenia and a criminal record. Her former in-laws had warned authorities about her. They had reportedly warned the church too. And yet she had purchased that AR-15 legally just 2 months before. Texas has no red flag laws. Nothing stopped her. Lakewood security cameras captured everything. They showed how easily she walked in. The failure was visible, documented, and undeniable. A grand jury was convened in early 2025 to examine not just the shooter, but the church's response, the security that failed, and every decision that led a deeply troubled woman into that hallway with a weapon of war. Joel told his congregation to have faith. He prayed for the victims. He even prayed for Moreno. But he didn't talk about gun access. He didn't talk about mental health systems. He didn't talk about what it means for a church that size to protect the people who walk through its doors. He talked about moving forward, about not shrinking back, about better days ahead. For many people sitting in those seats, it wasn't enough. For many more watching from outside, it confirmed something they had been feeling for years, that behind the smile, behind the stadiums, behind the bestseller lists and the Night of Hope tours and the immaculate television production, there's a growing gap between what Joel Osteen preaches and what the world actually needs from him. The crowds are still massive. The broadcasts still reach millions. The books still sell. But the questions are louder now than they have ever been. A generation is walking away from organized religion at a rate that has never been seen before in American history. Only 15% of Gen Z attends church regularly. They aren't looking for arenas and lights and motivational speeches. They are looking for authenticity, for action, for someone willing to sit with them in the hard things, instead of telling them to just believe harder. Joel Osteen built something genuinely remarkable. A camera-shy kid who never wanted to preach became the face of the biggest church in the country. That part of the story is real, but the cracks are real too. And they have been growing for a long time. A little boy named Samuel survived a bullet to the head inside a house of God. His grandmother is still asking for change, and Joel Osteen is still smiling.